Thank you for joining us. This is the Columbine Effect. I'm Ryan Riebenacker, joined by team members Amber Rottinghouse, Nathan Stephanie, Juliana Pelaez, and Annika Wall. Over the past several weeks, we've been researching mass shootings in the United States and have gathered info from local sources around the Cedar Valley. To start off our podcast, Amber, you handled the bulk of our research into the Columbine Effect itself. So firstly, what is the Columbine Effect and what's Columbine?
Well, I'll start with Columbine since that came first, obviously. So Columbine High School is located in Littleton, Colorado, and a major shooting happened there in 1999. 2 of the students went on a killing spree. They killed 13 students, injured over 20, and then turned the guns on themselves. At the time, it was the worst school shooting in U.S. history, and it was the beginning of a national debate on gun control and school safety. So basically, the 2 students had been planning to bomb the school for months. They took inspiration from the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. And then this, in turn, then Columbine became inspiration for following shooters. So, for example, Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School shooting is now the worst school shooting in history. There were 17 people killed. The gunman there took inspiration from Columbine.
Clearly a grim topic, but talking about the Columbine Effect itself, how have the effects of Columbine been felt in the years since it happened?
Mm-hmm. So basically, the Columbine Effect is a term that was coined by the media to explain how Columbine influenced shootings today. And basically, shootings have just massively increased since Columbine. There have been over 120 shootings since. 23 have been on school grounds, according to the FBI. 74 of those were known copycat cases. So these shooters studied Columbine, how those shooters did it, what tactics they used, and took that into consideration when planning their own. So, for example, the Newtown, Connecticut shooter had an obsession with the Columbine incident, and authorities found several video clips pertaining to the Columbine shooters, such as images and video pertaining to the massacre, on their computer.
And we did this story based right here in Waverly, Iowa, so a small town like this. I'll pose this question to anyone, but time and time again we asked our local sources whether they truly believe that an event like Columbine could happen in a small town like Waverly. What do you all think, and what are some of the responses you got to that question?
I guess if you guys don't mind me starting,
Ryan
and I, we talked with the Waverly Shell Rock High School principal, David Fox, and he was very adamant that it's not going to happen in Waverly, but we still want to act as though we need to prevent it just on the sheer whim that it does. But, I mean, isn't that kind of what everyone thinks about a school shooting? It can happen anywhere, but not here, not in my hometown, not where I work. This is something you see at Columbine, in Florida, in all of these other places, but not where I'm from. That's not what the people are like. So I don't know if there's a little bit of denial there, but I mean, overall, that's kind of the vibe that I got.
Right.
I'm kind of going to go more off numbers. So at the time of the Columbine shooting, the school's enrollment was approximately 1,700 students, according to the New Yorker. But Wartburg's enrollment is 1,500 students, so those sizes are very similar. So if something can happen at a school that size, it could just as easily happen here. And then in terms of high school, Cedar Falls High School has approximately 1,100 students. So they're all about the same size, so I think it's possible anywhere, really.
It's very scary to think about. Close calls. We looked into this a little bit earlier, Giuliano. You looked into some noticeable close calls over the years, whether that be in Iowa or around the world, of mass shootings or school shootings. Can you tell us a little bit about what you found?
Yeah. So what I found throughout the years, one article that I referenced off of was talking about the Columbine, after Columbine, and there was shootings since the year of Columbine and years after, from all the way to 2013. In that specific article that referenced every attempted shooting and shootings afterwards was referencing off the Columbine shootings, and specifically the 2 shooters who committed suicide at that time. And then there was an article by the Educator School Safety Network in the 2017 to 2018 school year that really is saying that there was 3,375 threats of violence made, and it was a 62% increase from the school year before. And a bunch of these threats were made either by bathroom walls, toilets, seats, the mirrors in bathrooms, telling people on social media, or sending notes to their teachers. And in this past year, there was 15 close calls that were made. One in Ohio, one in Michigan, New York, Illinois, and furthermore.
Right. Annika, you mentioned our interview with Dave Fox, who was the principal of Waverly Shell Rock, is still the principal of Waverly Shell Rock. We talked a little bit with him about how they train in cases of a mass shooting, what their process is. Could you fill us in?
So every 3 to 5 years is when the training occurs, and they only do it in the high school, interestingly enough. And he made that very clear that they do that simply because when you're younger, it's hard to distinguish what's real and what's not. You don't want to scar these kids for life,
Yeah.
But I mean, looking at the times, I thought it would be more like once every year, every other year. But the fact that they can go a whole graduating class without doing a mass shooter training is kind of concerning. Again, as Amber mentioned, the numbers, it's very possible that it could happen here, but there's also the small town mentality where it could never happen here. So there's also that to take into effect with it. But what they do is they bring in someone who is firing blanks into one part of the high school. The office then announces, for example, active shooter in the East Wing or wherever it would be at that point. And at that point, they simply encourage their students to just scatter, as it's easier to avoid what Fox calls a huge mass catastrophe if everyone is going different directions but with a purpose.
So in these trainings, the students and staff both go through them together? Or is it just the staff?
The staff goes through a separate training ahead of time, but they do
train the students?
They do train the students at one point.
That's important. How do you feel about the 3 to 5 years? Do you feel like that's too far apart?
I feel like it's too far apart, honestly. I also come from a high school, though, where we didn't have mass shooter training. So at least they're doing something, just kind of take a more positive outlook on it. But then again, at the same time, like I mentioned, you can go an entire graduating class not knowing what exactly to do in a situation like that. And honestly, with that luck, it would be the class that hadn't gone through it trying to lead the rest of them. So there's a lot of things that I think need to be adjusted, but at the same time, I'm also not in school administration.
And they're trying to strike a tough balance, too, with maintaining that this threat is real, but also not keeping their students in a perpetual state of fear that they can't really go to school and still feel safe. We also had the chance to talk with Bremer County Management Coordinator Kip Ladegi. He assists with training the Wartburg College Leadership Program for what to do in the case of a mass shooting, gave us some very powerful information, and talked to us about the role of the public when it comes to mass shootings or any disaster and how the burden of that responsibility really falls on the people, right or not.
I think that it does, at a certain extent with kind of the Columbine effect, as Amber mentioned earlier. Everyone knows that a mass shooting has the possibility to occur. This isn't a one-time event anymore. So at what point do we have to wait for someone else to save us, or when do we have to save ourselves? In talking to, I believe it was the police chief, it takes 5 or more minutes to get from a police station to a state of shooting approximately, and almost 70% of mass shootings are over in 5 minutes or less. That's FBI statistics right there.
Yeah.
It's not a lot of time, and quite often the shooting is done by the time the police arrive. But the one thing in CERT training, what they really want to do is kind of establish when to run, when to fight, and when to hide.
Yes.
So it's all about trying to strike that balance instead of just laying back and allowing your life to be stolen from you.
And what is CERT training?
It stands for Community Emergency Response Team Training, and their big thing is just establishing what to do in disaster situations. They talk about how to assess injuries in case of a mass shooting. They talk about how to fight back, what to do. There's so many things they cover. It's hard to identify just exactly what it is. It's more just, I kind of think about it as how to survive.
Yeah, I agree. Wartburg students who take the leadership theories and practices also do participate in that training. That's where this originates from. Nathan, turning to you now, you and I had a chance to talk with a prominent voice in the Waverly Police Department about the effect that mass shootings have had on rural communities like Waverly, Iowa. What are some of the things that you found that you thought were noticeable?
Well, you said a prominent voice. The prominent voice we did talk to is one of the police captains themselves, Captain Jason Leonard.
Yeah.
He's been in the Waverly community for over a decade now. And so he was, I think, the perfect person to talk to. That mass shootings have they've been affected by Columbine. They've increased so much in the last decade. He's seen that increase firsthand. And unfortunately, that increase is terrifying. The effect is something that we feel is real. It's something that you have however many school shootings occurring, in any given year. How many of them occurred? How many of them did we care about? How many do we know that affected people, that we actually put some time and effort into the news cycle, rather than just thinking, hey, this happened, let's move on. Unfortunately, we keep moving on when we shouldn't be. And that's something with the Waverly Police Department. They, as Captain Leonard said, the average response time is 5 to 8 minutes. Unfortunately, most of the violence is done within the first 3. So anyone who's responding to that is responding to aftermath, to bodies, or to injuries. Not likely to the very shooter themselves, who, with the majority of the time, has tried to or succeeded to take their own life at that point. And then I also found out from Captain Leonard, besides the response time, that, as Annika and Amber have both mentioned previously, we have small town mentality. We have that idea that that can't happen here. Unfortunately, every small town that's had a shooting like that also had a small town mentality, and that didn't help them. That state of fear was what keeps people alive. So the fact that Waverly is a small town in America means that it's just as likely to occur here as anyone else.
And what kind of steps does the Waverly Police Department take to try to prepare or prevent these kinds of issues?
As Captain Leonard said to us, that they try to reach out to the community to let them know that this is what you can do. This is what we're doing. Here's how we can all work together. That he really wants to foster that sense of community. As well as they're also going into schools to train people. They're going into high schools. They're coming to colleges like Wartburg, middle schools, Waverly Shell Rock, pretty much anywhere that they can benefit from having some training or knowing what to do. Especially, as Captain Leonard said, knowing just the run, hide, fight mentality. Especially knowing the running part is the part that they're trying to emphasize now. That knowing you can get out of the building instead of just cowering behind a desk or something, which was the original thing people were taught after Columbine. That you want to run, you want to get out of there so that they don't find you.
It seems as though the training and the preparedness that we've been discussing so far here today has really revolved around preparing and attempting to prevent. And it almost seems like there's not a lot that anyone can really do once the incident actually occurs. Do you guys feel like that's a fair statement?
Unfortunately, it is that when someone comes into a school with a gun, you don't have a gun, you don't have any weapons. You sometimes have stuff you can throw, but really it's just about running. It's about living.
Anyone else?
I mean, unfortunately, that's the case. You can, as Nathan said, you can throw stuff all you want, but ultimately, unless you have a gun with you, which, I mean, even Fox said there, sometimes having a gun is an invitation to be shot at. So it's definitely something to take into effect. At that point, you just got to run and run fast.
It's a powerful quote. As we move closer to concluding our expert panel, Juliana, I want to talk with you. What sort of changes can we expect to see that Iowa law might confront this issue with?
Well, in March of 2018, in the Iowa Department of Education, they had a code that was that prohibits firearms on school grounds with like a few exceptions. But recently in the Des Moines Register, there's a new law that is being proposed right now that would allow somebody to carry a concealed pistol or revolver onto public and private school grounds. So if like that person remains on the school driveways, parking lots, and sidewalks, they would be allowed to carry a gun. But in recent events, like in the New Zealand shooting, there has been a bill that's been passed with a vote of 119 people to 1 that approved of this bill. And in recent events that goes along with that, one of the presidential candidates, Eric Swalwell of Iowa, he says that he's the only Democrat in the 2020 presidential race who wants to ban both the military style assault weapons and buy back these. And so he's trying to put this plan in place that'd be $15 billion to carry out.
Right. And one final question, and this will be posed to anybody. What do you think you really learned and took away from our week's reporting and researching this topic?
I think what I took away from this, after looking at all the close calls that I saw, it's that there isn't that much training that is done. Like, we here at Wartburg have done training, but all these close calls, and since there's been 15 this past year, and including in this month, there needs to be training everywhere. There's only like tornado drills, like if a stranger comes in, but there isn't that many trainings everywhere, and there needs to be implemented in every place, because including in Sandy Hook, they did not expect that to happen. A guy just walks in and shoots a bunch of children up, and they're not the same age as us or the same age as high schoolers who are close to adult age. They're just little children. So I think training needs to be implemented in elementary, middle school, and high school.
Thank you, Juliana.
Do you mind if I just say one last thing?
Absolutely.
Also looking back at the Wartburg training, it's only one class that does that training, and it's required for one minor, the leadership minor. So lots of students are trying to get into that. So not everyone has the opportunity to do that training. Is that something that you look at implementing into an IS 101 course that all freshmen have to take? I mean, there's a lot of different possibilities that could happen in order to better prepare Wartburg, but I do feel like they're taking the right steps by requiring it for one class.
The right steps, but maybe quicker in finding their footing on those, perhaps. And visiting that class, I believe it was only 10 to 15 students that are in that, probably a year or per semester, as opposed to, Amber, what did you say? It was about 1,400 students that go to Wartburg?
About 1,500.
1,500, thank you. That's not a huge percentage. Anyway, thank you all for what you had to say. To conclude our podcast, as of this taping on April 15th, 2019, so far no school shootings have taken place this year. However, the burden and responsibility for those events continues to fall on the shoulders of everyday Americans. For Amber Rottinghouse, Juliana Pelaez, Nathan Stephanie, and Anna Kowal, I'm Ryan Riebenacker. Thank you for listening to The Columbine Effect.